Matt and Jordan Peterson. And I thought it was a great debate because it kind of exposed how, like how much of a fraud Jordan Peterson really is in my eyes. Like, he likes to obfuscate and equivocate all his arguments. And your show kind of opened up a lot of other like atheist channels for me, like Arn Ra and Anthony Magnabosco.
Okay, good.
And Aaron is here today.
Yes.
And I actually tried, like all that method out and it seemed to work pretty well. But my question, I am an atheist. I consider myself to be a very evidence-based person. But, I'm still a layman in science. And even though I don't really believe in any sort of afterlife, given the evidence we have of it so far, that doesn't necessarily mean I don't want there to be one. So my question would be about the concept of nothingness. And I remember seeing a video of you, Tracie, debating that a few times about like, the contradiction between nothingness existing. So I try to articulate as best as I could.
No, I would say that, first of all, it probably wouldn't apply to can things die, right? Like things can die and that doesn't equal nothing. So I'm not going to sit here and say that I think that there's an afterlife because absolute nothing seems like a incoherent concept to me. I will say that there's one sort of aside is that I heard somebody talk yesterday, and one of the things they said was that as a Christian, when they believed in an afterlife, they were never so afraid to die. And after they became an atheist and believed that there was nothing going to happen, that they die and that's it, they were so relieved. And it's interesting how different people have different perspectives on the concept of death or the concept of afterlife or the concept of no afterlife. And I guess that's just an observation I'm making. It's not.
It is pretty interesting because I do have friends who are also atheists and they believe in nothingness. And like, I guess it maybe just kind of boils down to your imagination. Because to me, the way I think of it, if there is an afterlife and if there is such a thing as infinity, then you get to, like, you have an infinite amount of things to experience with. Whereas, like, some people who think, oh, well, we'll get bored of it. But it's like, there's infinite possibilities. So,
or are you just doing the same thing infinitely?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it could be, but
I don't know. I don't know what that
we'll
would
never
be.
know.
I mean, so I have a lot of relatives who believe in an afterlife. And from talking to them, it doesn't seem that their belief in an afterlife gives them any comfort when they contemplate death. So I know that that's always put out there as a, well, if you believe that, there's an afterlife or you're going to heaven or something like that, you shouldn't be afraid to die. But whenever they've confronted some kind of, grave health crisis or whatever, it doesn't seem to help them. They seem to be as afraid of death.
Short of like people who are hardcore faith healing, there's not many people that really seem to want to put their hands in God's hands or their lives in God's hands very often.
Yeah.
And I don't think that it's because they're afraid that they haven't been, a good enough Christian or whatever to get into heaven. I think some of them sincerely believe they're going to heaven, but they're still afraid.
But they're still in there taking chemo treatments.
That's right.
Putting off heaven as long as they can, right? I don't need to go to heaven just yet. I'm enjoying this imperfect life full of pain.
I think that's where the whole kind of subconscious doubt of their beliefs comes into play because, like, maybe they do want to believe that something happens in the end, but like it's death is a natural kind of instinct for us to fear.
Yeah. Except for, like I say, those faith healers, man, they get the gold star for commitment.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they are committed to that. So, but
that's not helping you. That question.
Yeah.
So I try to articulate it as best as I could. So nothingness can't exist, like, by the actual definition.
But my thing on nothing has nothing to do with afterlife.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is the idea that there's, an absolute form of nothing just seems incoherent to me. But I'm not making, that has nothing to do with afterlife.
Well, that's just a preface to the question, so we could just kind of, like, agree on a term. But the question goes, if nothingness can't exist and our consciousness is something that is able to perceive existence, then logically, how can our consciousness become nothing and perceive non-existence when we die?
You wouldn't perceive the non-existence. You wouldn't perceive anything because there would be nothing to perceive, right? You wouldn't have a perceptive capacity. What I'm saying is, because I'm saying absolute nothing seems incoherent to me, does not mean that I don't acknowledge that there are things that exist that don't exist later. I mean, I know for a fact that a thing can stop existing or change form. And if you change form, right, if your matter changes form in such a way that the brain that perceives is no longer a brain and there's no longer any sort of impulses and there's no reason to think that there's any perception happening, the matter is still there. You didn't turn into nothing. You just don't perceive anymore, like a car doesn't run anymore when you take the carburetor out.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that aspect, but I guess it's just kind of like hard to comprehend because it's such a very metaphysical concept for us to understand how consciousness can't not be.
Well, I mean, I mean, this may not work for everybody, but I've always kind of had that same attitude when people say, hey, there was this whole existence before I was born and I didn't perceive that.